You've probably heard of the Rothschilds, the banking dynasty that financed Europe's wars and rewrote its politics. But few remember the family who did the same in the East. They were called the Sassoons, exiles turned financiers, merchants turned monarchs of trade. They built fortunes from goods the world demanded and governments condemned. They mastered the global economy before it even had a name. Welcome to the Financial Historian, where money, power, and history collide, and nothing is ever as simple as it looks. The Sassoon story begins not in London or New York, but in Baghdad, in the old Ottoman Empire at the turn of the 19th century. David Sassoon was born in 1792, the son of the treasurer to the Ottoman governor. For generations, the Sassoons had been successful Jewish merchants, managing trade routes that stretched from Basra to Persia. But that prosperity came at a cost. In the volatile politics of empire, wealth always drew suspicion. When power shifted, the Sassoons fell out of favor. Persecution followed. In 1829, David fled Baghdad with nothing but his family, his faith, and his knowledge of trade. He ended up in Bombay, a humid, crowded colonial outpost under British control. It wasn't the empire's capital, but it was its artery, the link between Britain's mills and Asia's markets. For a refugee, it was both exile and opportunity. David Sassoon arrived with no formal education, no title, and no land. But what he did have was priceless. Experience. He understood supply chains before the word existed. He knew what the British wanted, what India could produce, and what China would buy. And above all, he knew that where there is instability, there is profit, if you have the courage to stay when others flee. He began small: cotton, yarn, textiles, anything that could move through the ports. But he did something different. He built trust across cultures. He hired Jewish, Indian, and Arab merchants, spoke multiple languages, and understood that relationships, not contracts, built empires. In a city divided by caste, creed, and colonial hierarchy, Sassoon created something radical, a network that ignored borders. And then came the product that would make him rich and infamous: opium. The British East India Company had long monopolized the trade, exporting opium grown in India to China, where addiction was widespread and growing. The Chinese government had banned the drug, but demand never disappeared. Smuggling became the shadow economy of the 19th century, and Sassoon stepped into it with precision, not chaos. He didn't run opium dens or smuggling boats himself. He financed, insured, and supplied the trade, the banker behind the merchant behind the empire. His company, David Sassoon & Co., became a financial and logistical backbone of Britain's China trade. By the 1840s, his ships were sailing under the Union Jack, his warehouses filled with goods bound for the East. Profit wasn't the end goal, it was the means to build permanence. Every dollar earned in opium or cotton was turned into something tangible: property, ports, or industry. And it worked. When the American Civil War disrupted cotton supplies to Britain in the 1860s, Indian cotton became vital, and the Sassoons controlled it. When Chinese silver payments flooded the markets, they handled the exchange. Every global disruption became their local opportunity. But success brought competition, and empires don't share easily. The British East India Company eyed the Sassoons with suspicion. The Chinese authorities despised them. Rival merchant families tried to undercut them. Yet David Sassoon's network held strong, partly because it was built on family. He sent his sons across the empire, to Baghdad, Hong Kong, Shanghai, and London, each one establishing a new branch of the family business. They weren't just traders, they were ambassadors of capital. Wherever the British flag went, the Sassoons followed, financing its journey. By the time David Sassoon died in 1864, his fortunes stretched across continents. His sons had become global financiers, his name synonymous with reliability in London and Hong Kong alike. Elias David Sassoon, his eldest son, expanded into China, opening offices in Shanghai and Hong Kong just as the ports were forced open by the Opium Wars. There, the Sassoon Empire entered its second phase, from trade to finance, from merchant wealth to banking power. Shanghai in the late 19th century was a strange city, half Chinese, half colonial, built on opium, silver, and foreign debt. Banks and brothels shared the same streets. Every Western power wanted a piece, and the Sassoons provided the credit to make it happen. They built warehouses, financed shipping, and bought land in what would become the Bund, Shanghai's famous waterfront of wealth and ambition. By the 1880s, they were called the Rothschilds of the East, not because they matched the Rothschilds' influence in Europe, but because they replicated their strategy, turned mobility into dominance. Where others saw distance and difference, they saw opportunity. Albert Abdullah Sassoon, another of David's sons, returned to Britain, was knighted by Queen Victoria, and joined London's elite. The family had come full circle, from exiles of Baghdad to British aristocracy. The empire had rewarded its financial servants well, but behind the polished image of respectability, the family's fortune still rested on its most controversial foundation, the opium trade. By the time Britain had won the Second Opium War in 1860, Chinese ports were flooded with the drug. Sassoon ships carried it by the ton. It was legal under British law but devastating under Chinese reality. Addiction spread through every level of society, and yet the global economy of the 19th century ran on this contradiction. Moral outrage on one side, profit on the other. The Sassoons didn't invent the system. They perfected it,